Almost 1:45. We'll get started in, oh, it's 1:45 now. Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are logging in around the world. My name is Heather George, and I'm excited to talk to you guys about variables to consider for strategic PBIS planning. I've also got Karen Elfner with me from the USF Florida project, as well as Jason Byers from the Georgia Department of Education. We also have Laura Kern and Betsy Lazega from USF that are also going to be assisting us in the process with the chats and the polls and helping to answer any questions. This session today is the second session within a series of 3 sessions under the district state leadership strand. And if you were just in the last session, that was talking about district systems and the District Systems Fidelity Inventory. Today we're talking about state right now, and the session after us will be talking about database decision-making practices at district and state levels. As a reminder, we do have some virtual expectations, being true to PBIS, making sure that we're clear and what our expectations are. And we would ask that if you are putting some information, if you have questions that you're sending in through the polls or the chat, to make sure that we are being respectful in that process, using person-first language, that type of thing. We will make sure to try to answer all of your questions. We have a big group that's in here, but thankfully it's recorded, and you can keep watching it over and over. So you guys obviously know how to get here, that you're in the room right now. How to navigate through the session page, just as a reminder for you, you've got you can see down here in 1, 2, or 3 on that slide, there's the chat, the polls, the people, files, everything that we're covering today. You can find it directly in the files pod. So if you go to that files and click on it, you'll see everything from the links we're going to be talking about, the different annual reports, the projects, as well as some different versions for the handouts. You can download them directly to your computer today. We do have some polls that we've entered. If you wanted to go ahead and start to complete them, you certainly can, but we will give you a chance during it as well. And feel free to please use the chat to type your questions as we're going. Also, you're supposed to be careful on accidentally navigating away. Don't panic. Believe me, I've done that already 100 times already in this rehearsal process. So just know that it sometimes will open up another window. There's always a way to get back in. But there's a help desk, thankfully, and they've been extremely responsive along the way. All right, so that's all of the basic logistics. Let's get into talking about today and the strategic planning for states in particular. So we're going to talk to you about those big ideas surrounding effective organizations, their leadership, the various activities that folks need to engage in for that. If you're not as familiar with the State Systems Fidelity Inventory, we're going to be introducing that to you today, but you'll also get a chance to hear from what some states have done related to that strategic planning and how the SSFI can assist in some of the goal setting. And then you'll hear directly from these 2 states to hear their specific goals, but then how they've used data to actually make changes at their state and to be more responsive across the board. If you're wondering where to go to for state, or if you're functioning as a district, there is a spot in our national site, PBIS.org, that if you go to the topics, you can drop right down and you can see the district state PBIS, and much of the information that we're going to be covering today, at least the basics of it, foundational, is contained on that site. So the big idea is, if you guys had a chance to see the keynote yesterday with George Sagai, he talked about overall, we're looking at what are the outcomes that we're wanting to achieve and what are the outcomes we are achieving. And when we're looking at those outcomes specifically, sometimes there's things we want to say, we want them to be a little bit different. And how are they going to be different? Well, we've got to examine our data. And from our data, we've got to start to say and look at what are our practices doing? What do we need to change, particularly in our systems? And when we make those changes, using that data to determine, is it making a difference? And are we starting to achieve those equitable outcomes that we want for all of our kids across the board? But coming from that state level a bit can be like peeling an onion, I think. I think when we're at the state, there's such a big responsibility because it's this state, but then you've got districts. And if you truly are statewide, you've got every single district or LEA that you've got to be able to allow access for and to be able to try to support for them. And they in turn is trying to build that capacity of how they're supporting their schools across your state, and those schools, how they're building their capacity to support every single classroom on that school campus so that they have the best impact to be able to support equitably every single student in those classrooms on their school campuses. And that's going to require us to engage in this database problem solving process with the practices so that we are producing these positive, predictable, safe learning environments. How we do that is all guided by this leadership team. And that leadership team needs to be looking at who are our stakeholders, who do we need to bring to the table, start to get their voice and start to get them on board for the changes of those outcomes that we would like to achieve. What's the funding piece? How can we align this with other things that we've got already set up because we don't need to duplicate our efforts? What types of policy implications could this have, as well as what do we need to do to build our workforce so that they can be able to best support what we are wanting to achieve out there across our state and our districts. What that might mean is the professional development under training. It might mean the technical assistance and the coaching that's needed out there. And it's going to mean we're going to have a method in how we're looking at our data to best inform what types of trainings and technical assistance is needed across the board in hopes that we're developing these model demonstrations across the state. But George talked a little bit yesterday about effective organizations, and we do know in the research that effective organizations, they're guided by quality leadership, and that quality leadership is coming from this common language, this common experience, and a common vision. And that common vision is going to help set that foundation for when we think about what does everybody need. So as a state, it's one of those things of looking at what does everybody, all of our districts need. So if you're from a state project, you might be saying, well, we're not working in every single district. That's okay. The districts that you are working with then, or the ones that you are funded to work with, let's say, it could be then what do all of they need? Then you've got to think about, well, some need a little bit more. If we've got some districts that might be farther in location, they might not be readily accessible to where your home base is for your state project. They may be some of their small and rural districts. They might need a little bit more supports from you, more check-ins, more additional work out there in the field. But you've got to have a plan for that and using your data and that constant problem-solving process. So this multi-tiered framework that we're using with PBIS, it's the same that we ask for individual schools to do as they're looking at their kids. What does all kids need? But they're also the same as what do all of our classrooms need? What do all of our teachers need? And as a district, they're looking at this going, what do all of our schools need? And then what do some need? What do few need? And then the same too as a state, what do some of our districts need? What do all of them need? What do a few of them need? The more intensive, but we're using our data across this three-tiered logic. So the part that I always say that we're not exempt, the piece is it doesn't matter where we're coming from and what our position is. None of us are exempt. We all fall under this multi-tiered framework. There's times that folks are going to need more, and we need to be able to have a plan and how to be able to deliver and support them in that. So let's talk about this effective leadership. One way that we can best support them in that is we've got to have a clear vision for change. So we've got to think about, all right, where are we now? Where would we like to be? And that starts to build together so we can have that common experience, that common language. So we've got to be focusing, we know effective leaders focus on their constituents. It's their districts, their schools, their students. We know that we've got to create and sustain relationships with our stakeholders. You know, we hear plenty of research out there that there's positive greetings at the door in the classroom make for a great opportunity, and kids learn better when they walk in that classroom door and they're greeted from their teacher. The same is true with our stakeholders out there across the field. We've got to sustain these relationships. That's going to assist us in this strategic action planning, using our data in that process. From that, though, sometimes the data are going to identify that we're not achieving goals that we would like, may identify some barriers that we're having, and sometimes we have to revise the goals and come up with some additional strategies and how we can work through that. Again, all driven by that common vision. And then using our data to evaluate how well we're doing, but investing in that professional development that is going to help us achieve those outcomes that we wanted. So establishing that team membership, to be fair, there's been so much that has occurred across all of our states, all of our countries, all of our districts. And so everybody's going, okay, how long should I hold my breath? Will this initiative be here for a while? When is the next election? Things may change. How long is this person going to be appointed? When are they retiring? Because we know that a new leader comes in, they may have some new things that they want to do. And so sometimes people are hesitant before they jump on board. That's completely normal in this process. But we've got to understand, to bring people to the table and have them become part of our team, we've got to meet them where they're at, be able to understand that, so that we can move towards establishing an effective leadership team. So in that team, again, nobody's exempt. There's that state, district, school. There's still a leadership team that needs to exist at those three levels. And that team needs to have some basic agreements around achieving that collective vision that they've all come up with. From that, they're using their data, they're implementing, they're coming up with specific activities and strategies and what they're going to do. And then they have a plan and how they're going to evaluate and look at their data to see how the impact that they're having. And it's a cyclical process of using the data constantly, changing what they're doing based upon what that data we're saying, and then evaluating to see if it's making the impact. And again, then we have to keep our teams informed because we want to keep our stakeholders at the table. So again, what does that mean? Going back to a vision, it's identifying where do we want to go and developing a brief statement of purpose. Those of you know that I like to fly Southwest a lot. Has not been happening much at all this year, but one of the terminals that I was in, I think this may have been a terminal in Texas, they were just finishing up a PD meeting with all of their, the folks that were working the ticket counters. And they were coming up with what their purpose was and reminding it. And this was their collective purpose. And I was like, oh, I got to take a picture of this. And people thought I was just kind of crazy, as if I was going to report it, that they had chart paper up in the terminal. But it was like, this applies to everybody. There's got to be a common vision in what you're doing. It's not just education specific. So one of the, this is an example of Florida's, our mission and services. It took us a while to figure out, hey, our funder helped define what our mission was, because they said, this is what we want you to do with the money. But then we had to figure out, well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to build the capacity with this strangely shaped state? And we need to tell people, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And so the more that you're clear on that, folks can understand. It's like those clear expectations. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. This is what you do. This is what I can expect from it. And this is how it all works out. And again, I think it just helps to keep the stakeholders at the table in that process. So it's important to know that what you've done is a vision. It's got to be on a scale of social importance. So for Florida, all of the different color coding is indicating the level of implementation or the level of activity that we have across the states. About 18, 19 years ago when we started this, we didn't have any activity across the state. So there's only been 4 districts that we've never had contact with. 2 of them have gone inactive since then, but the rest of them all have some level of activity. If they're a dark green color on here, that means they have more than 90% of their schools actively implementing with our project and reporting evaluation data. That's a huge accomplishment. And that is saying this is what's important for our state. So you've got to think about that. How is it for you? Georgia, for example, when they first started out, this is what they looked like. Majority of it was gray. There was not much activity across the state at all because they were just starting out. And they were surprised when they were able to see all of the different districts they brought on the first couple of years, how many they even had. Now, when you look at, as of last year, orange means big time, you are actively implementing PBIS. You have an active district leadership team. That just doesn't happen miraculously on districts on their own typically. It means there's been a state that has a team, they have come together, they had a clear vision, and they came up with the plan and how they were going to roll it out, but they had to bring their stakeholders on board in order for that to happen. So how do we do this? We've got to figure out what our challenges are, what our needs are. We've got to figure out what our strengths are, because there's always something that we can build upon. To what extent are our schools, our districts meeting the expectations? So it's not just about academics. We also need to know, how are folks doing, the kids behaving out there? How are they also doing emotionally? That well-being piece is just as important. We also need to look at then, are we effective at building the implementation capacity of PBIS? Is our approach resulting in valued outcomes for all of our stakeholders? Well, that's going to mean we're going to have to identify who our stakeholders are. So it's not just the families, the students, the teachers, the staff, our businesses, but it might also be our legislators that we have. It might also be our school boards that we have. It could be the senators, you know, whoever else you have for directors across your state. Is this value for the stakeholders? Do they view what you're doing as useful and high quality? If they don't, that's something that you would want to think about and reevaluate. And from there, you start to develop some goals, knowing that what you're going to hear from Florida and Georgia today, they have been implementing for at least 10 years each. And so these things just don't happen overnight. It's been an evolving process. But the strategic planning is a cyclical process. And so you can start to see you're always going back and looking. There might be new challenges each year. I think this past year has been a great example of that. How do we move and have that continuity of learning during the pandemic? How do we continue to stay relevant when everybody was at home working virtually? And so people had to scramble in this process. So as you can see, bringing your stakeholders together, making sure that they have a voice is absolutely critical and essential. And that plan development, the strategic planning, starts to take some time where it evolves, where it could just be a series of sticky notes of everybody's voice, to simple goals and objectives, to much more elaborate goals and objectives. But as you're building your stakeholder involvement and as you're building your capacity across your state, you start to realize, what are the possibilities? So you can start to see, like, we can move into mental health, we can move into juvenile justice, we can move into other different areas that we might not have thought of being able to align and work collaboratively with before. And at some point, you're meeting with the governor. I would say that's some pretty good stakeholder group. This was Georgia in particular. They've met with the governor, previous governor, but they also had a standing ovation at the House of Representatives as well. Again, a great example of building visibility. It's showing everybody, hey, the money that you're putting here in our State Department, this is making a difference. We want you to know this, so it's value added and it keeps them at the table. So one way that we can guide in what we're doing is the State Systems Fidelity Inventory. We've also referred to this as a blueprint. It's somewhat of a self-assessment. It is not intended to be an evaluative model in that you get a score and that means something nationally. The federal government's not looking at it whatsoever. The key is, it's for you to be able to determine, based upon the various components of the leadership team, your stakeholder involvement, your funding, training, all of those implementation components I talked about earlier. Are you examining all of the different areas? Have you thought through this? Because we want to make sure that we are not duplicating efforts. We really want to make sure that we're working smarter and we're aligning all of our efforts. And this guide that we have is one method that can assist you in developing your strategic action plan. So what I'm going to do is now turn it over to Karen, who's going to talk to you about the Florida project and how it's moved from at the state, but working at that district level, and how they're constantly using the data to coach what we're doing across all of our districts so that we do have that impact statewide and how we're building those relationships across the board.
Thank you, Heather. Well, I am presenting to you our logic model for Florida. Oh, Heather, it's going backwards. Okay. So this is our logic model, and you can see from here on the bottom right, that's our mission statement, which Heather alluded to a little earlier. And our mission statement for our project has maintained this, it's been relatively constant over the last 20 years or so. Our mission has always been to build district capacity, to be able to support student behavior. The PBIS framework has evolved a little bit over those years, and how we work has changed, but our mission has remained constant. But we have always maintained that idea of districts and schools and student focus. But what we wanted to be able to do is really come together as a project and identify some very specific objectives that are measurable and that we could look at with our data and identify if as a project we're having the impact that we want to have. I'm hearing that my sound is a little muffled, so I'm going to try to do that and see if that sounds better. Does that sound better maybe? Okay, good. All right, so what we did a little while back, we established a different way of prioritizing our objectives, and we did some work with our team around establishing some objectives so that regardless of our funding and regardless of, because we get grants, they come and go, and they have specific areas that we need to focus on, specific deliverables, but regardless, year in, year out, and the kinds of funding and focus that those require, our project has, and PBIS and the framework maintain some certain consistencies. And we really wanted to define that in a way that we could kind of stabilize and focus on. And so that's what we did. So we bring that to our first poll, which is we wanted to know if you're in a state project or if you are familiar with your state project, do you know if your state project has any statewide goals or outcomes? So if you would go into the poll section, which is over near your chat in the files, and look for poll number 1, do you have any identified state goals or outcomes? And then Heather is going to help share those results with us so we can get an idea. So about a third of us aren't sure. A third have specific and measurable goals. Maybe some about 20% general. We're still voting. So we're kind of across the board here. Some goals, some not goals, some don't know. Okay, thanks, Heather. So as a project, we, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we look at our data at the end of the year, but we really felt like if we could establish some goals. Oh Lord, I'm having trouble. I'm gonna give it back to you, Heather, because I'm having trouble forwarding.
Okay. Why is this like this? Let's see. Okay.
Start at the bottom left.
Let me stop share for a minute.
Okay.
Okay. Is that working?
We see your whole desktop.
Really?
Mhm.
That's odd. Okay. It's off. It's off now, correct?
Yes. There.
Okay.
So if you just want to advance. So what we did was, if you notice our goals, so we have those three main goals. We have our large outcomes at the district, the school, and the student level. And really, that's because we're a state project. So if you were a district project, you might just have district and school level goals, or school and student level goals. So it just depends on kind of which level you're at in terms of the kind of level outcomes that you might have. But then we took a look at what are the data that we have available to us as a project, and how can we measure, and what would that look like if we were going to have an impact on those? How will we know if we're making leverage in those outcomes at the district, school, and student level? So for instance, at the school level, we really wanted to make sure that we are increasing the percentage of our schools that are active and have fidelity across all tiers of implementation. And now this is a new kind of a focus for our project, which might seem a little strange. We've always been a three-tiered model, but our emphasis over the years has been really at the tier 3 level, at systems district level, and not at a school level. So that you'll see how that kind of shapes how we work. So we take each one of those objectives, and we're going to focus a little more in on that and decide how we can make that something we can really measure. So going on. So there's that objective. So if we want to increase that percentage, we first define when we want to see an impact. So we decided a date, 2024. And then we broke that down by 4 different indicators that we would know that we have made an impact, and we will measure where we are now, and we set a goal for where we wanted to be by that target date. So we are really putting it all out here for you all to see right now, because some of this isn't really a pretty picture for where we are. But by setting these very concrete goals, we feel like we're really going to push forward as a project in ways that we haven't done. So the first one you'll see is around increasing the number of active trained schools across all 3 tiers. And as I indicated, our focus at tier 3 has historically, at least since we've been doing school-wide, been at the systems level for tier 3, working with districts to really build their capacity and these infrastructures that they need to be able to carry out that kind of support. Not so much at school-based training. And so we don't have very many schools that have received training at the tier 3 level. We have a lot of districts who we work with, but not so many schools. So we are only at a 16% of our active schools that have received any tier 3 training, tier 1, 2, and 3. So really, by having a 50% goal, that's a lot of schools that our project is looking at pushing that forward in terms of the scope of training across all tiers. So then you can go on and look down the other elements. The last one there, go ahead, was to increase the percentage of schools that maintain professional development. What we started to notice is we built into our district's dashboards, we knew a lot of schools have been implementing 10, 15, 18 years, and some of those schools were losing their integrity of implementation, losing the effectiveness of their implementation, their outcomes were slipping, but they weren't engaging in very much professional development. We know they have a lot of turnover in these schools, and they were not doing booster training, refresher training, or training their new staff and their new team members. And so we really wanted to increase the proportion of our schools that didn't go more than 3 years without engaging in some sort of a tier 1 PBIS professional development to maintain or increase their knowledge of their. So then we wanted to make sure, next of all, that we then tie this information to actually the process of what we do as a project. So there's that target that we have to increase the percentage of schools that are engaging in professional development. And now what we're doing is we're tying that goal, because we want to increase that, and what are the activities that our project engages in that we think that are going to increase that. And so we list those activities. Some of those may be activities we already engage in. We may brainstorm new activities or enhance current activities. And then how do we know if we did those activities? That's what the documentation is. So how will we know that we did that? And then the standards. The standards aren't there so that we know to what level, what proportion of schools do we think need to engage in booster training, or how many of our districts do we want to include professional development or tier 1 training in their annual plans, so that we have some sort of a target that we're reaching as a project. Because without those goals, then there may not be activity in that direction. So by establishing those standards, then we know what kinds of activities we want to do, about how much effort we want to put towards those activities. And then at the end of the cycle, whether it's a year, when we do our progress monitoring, and we can look at the data and we see, have we moved our level? Have we increased the percentage of schools that are maintaining professional development? And if our answer is no, then we can go back and look. Did we meet our standards? Did we actually engage in the booster training? Did we have the influence on our annual planning with districts that we intended to do? So did we engage in all those activities that we thought would move that needle? And if we did, then great. And if we didn't, then why not? So for this, I'd like to go ahead and have you look at the poll section and answer the polls for number 3 and number 4. I think they also have numbers on them. So we want to know if you have data systems to measure your goals and outcomes, that about half of you had goals and outcomes for your projects. And then I also want you to think about, so if you have data, if you have data systems, who gets to see those data systems? So who is that data visible to? So this is great. We've got the majority of people saying that they have data systems for those goals and outcomes. It's great. And the data are visible to schools, about 40%, districts, about a third, state project, about a fifth to a quarter, a little bit to the data system developers only, and some other. Okay, so maybe other stakeholders. Great. So, and that may be if you're a state level or a district level project, you wouldn't necessarily need to have state people be able to see your data. Well, our project has worked very hard over the years to have database problem solving built for our schools and our districts. And we have built data systems for them to be able to do that. And this is an example of this year, we launched a new reporting system. And this is our district level dashboard. And accompanied with this are lots of detail pages as well. But this is the face page, the first thing they encounter. And there's a similar one at the school level, but this is the district level. And so we train our schools and districts to set goals, to look broadly at how their schools are doing, what proportion of their schools are implementing. So for instance, on this dashboard on the left side, you can see that 20% of their schools in this district need support to implement with Fidelity at Tier 1. And then they could then find which are those schools that need support and so on. They can also find out what proportion of their schools are having increases in discipline outcomes. We actually use Power BI right now for our embedded reports. So we have that accessible to our project staff. And then we embed the reports so that they are available to schools and districts through our website. And then what proportion of the schools in their district are having significantly disproportionate outcomes. And for us, that's a 2.5 risk ratio or higher for any subgroup. And then the professional development. So here's that indicator that I was speaking to. Now this district is doing well. They have none of their schools need support to get to be up on their professional development. That means that they've all had professional development, PBIS training of some sort for Tier 1 within the last 3 years. But this would indicate to a district coordinator if they had some schools that maybe they needed to flag to have them, they needed some support and some help. So what we realized though is we didn't have this at a state level. We have a lot of data at the state level, and we looked at that at the end of the year when we built our annual report, but we didn't have this kind of database goals and problem solving readily available for our staff to do problem solving. So by coming up with that, with those measurable goals and outcomes, we are now building dashboards that will help to identify where we are and where we want to, so we can measure where we're going. The dashboard, well, Power BI, it's Microsoft Power BI is the platform that we use and then we just embed the reports in our website. Okay. So this is what we used to do with our data at the end of the year, because we had this lovely report, which we worked really hard, spent hundreds of hours putting together. And we were very proud of it. And we spent all year working with districts and schools, telling them that they need to have very focused database goals and then monitor those goals. And so we wanted to do that as a project so that we can maximize our power as a project and our effectiveness as a project. So by establishing these SMART goals and objectives for our project, which we are just defining this year for the first time across the board, and monitoring those through our new dashboard that we're in the process of building, and tying those together with the activities that our project engages in, we really feel like we're going to be able to have a big impact on the field. So another poll I have for you, this next page shows you a image from our annual report. So this was one of the things that helped us to really look differently at where our training efforts are going. So you can see that tall dark blue bar, that's initial training. So that was the year we did the most initially trained schools. Now, we've trained more schools in a year since then, but the gray indicates retraining or booster or supplemental training, and the orange is retraining. So you can see over the last 3 years, we're really training more, retraining a lot of schools. But if you've been doing it this long, you get a lot of turnover and the need for retraining. But does that shift then what we need to do as a project? And rather than in the past, what we did with our annual report data, we tried lots of things. So while you're responding to what you do with your data, here's some things we tried. As an evaluation team, we would look at the data and present items of concern to the project. And that's kind of hard because that's sort of like an expert model that doesn't tend, it kind of falls flat. Then we tried having the staff members each take a page or a report, a piece of the report, and look at it for what is it, so what, now what, you know, and then report back to the team so that everybody kind of internalized and thought about what does this mean for us? What do we, is there something we need to do in response to it? Kind of like a jigsaw activity. And that kind of was long and didn't really, it ended up being too tedious and long because our report's very long. Then we tried having our evaluation team look at the report, and we did get some leverage going there, but not quite enough to really get to that powerful level that I think we're going to be at now. Because now that we have SMART objectives that are guiding what we're looking at, right? Why we're looking at the data, what we're doing, and they're tied to our activities, I think that it will lead to a greater impact by our project. So hopefully next year, this time, we'll be able to share some of that, what we've done.
Karen, do you want the poll to be done?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So about a third of the people have project staff data days. So it might be nice to hear about what some project data days look like. So reviewing progress towards those goals. So if you wouldn't mind, while we transition to the next topic, if you could type in some of your goals, any of the goals that your projects have into the chat so that we can kind of keep a record of what are some of the project goals and outcomes that you have that you're measuring. That would probably be helpful and interesting to everybody who's participating. And then we'll go ahead and transition over.
Jason, do you want me to go ahead and attempt to give you? You got it. Thank you, Karen.
All right, I think we are. Do you have anything else that you wanted to say about that last poll? I just want to make sure that I give you the opportunity to do that.
You go right ahead, Jason.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Great job. I really appreciate that. My name is Jason Byers. I am the PBIS program manager at the Georgia Department of Education. And I wanted to just kind of share, appreciate the opportunity Heather's given the state of Georgia to kind of share a little bit around some of the ways that we've used the SSFI, how it's kind of changed our practice, and really how it has really allowed us to reimagine the work that we're doing. We recently were also just aligned with our curriculum and instruction department at the Georgia Department of Education. And so that also is going to help us realign our work. One of the things that I do have to start off by saying is that all the work and the things that we're going to talk about today are made possible because I have an unbelievable group of TAs that work at the Georgia Department of Education with me. A lot of them are in this session today. I just posted in the chat their names because if you see their names and have questions and I think just because we're virtual doesn't mean that we can't stop networking and getting to know the people in other states that are doing the same work. So I just posted their names in that chat so that we can really start connecting. So I appreciate that team. I appreciate everything that they do. And again, this is really made possible because of the work that they're doing. So for us, I really want to focus on 3 key areas here, and that is how the SSFI has really challenged our thinking around our annual evaluation report. It really has challenged us around how we set up and conduct our team meetings, and then also for future, how we're going to re-examine and rethink about our strategic plan. And then at the end, I'll just kind of wrap up a little bit by talking briefly about our process for implementing the SSFI. So first of all, let's talk just a few minutes about how we're rethinking our annual evaluation report. And we just heard a little bit about how Florida has also reimagined their annual report. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and show you that rethinking these 3 areas really fulfills all the guidelines that are laid out in the SSFI. And so right before I talk about a topic or what we're rethinking or how we're realigning things, you'll see that I'll have a slide up that kind of addresses the guidelines of what I'm about to talk about, and I'll highlight those in red. And then by the time we talk about these 3 items, you'll see all items are going to be highlighted in green, which means they've met the guidelines for the SSFI, and it's really aligned our work right with the SSFI. So when you see these slides, that's what that is about. I won't go through and read those to you. So two places you can access our annual report, because I want you to have access to that. One is on the Georgia Department of Education website under PBIS. There's a link to the most recent one. And then also in the files for our room today, I've also uploaded the document there. So either place, a lot of people don't want to download documents and then save all those, take up the space on your computer. So I wanted to show you where you're able to go and take a look at where you can find work. So let me just kind of contrast a little bit of what our annual evaluation reports have looked like in the past. First of all, prior to 2017-18, we contracted with an external evaluator to do our annual evaluation report. And then in 2017-18, we hired an internal evaluator. Now, I'll clarify this a little bit. We did not hire the internal evaluator in 17-18. We hired them in 2019, but because of some difficulties getting our past annual reports completed, he had to go back and complete our 17-18 report and 18-19 report, which he's finalizing now. One of the true benefits of an internal evaluator is them understanding the timeline and being able to get the work done in a more timely manner. It's been my experience. Secondly, really prior to our internal evaluation, our PBIS annual evaluation was really, it was a status report. It's what did PBIS implementation look like in the state? It really looked like the map that Heather showed you earlier from Georgia, and Heather, I appreciate you showing that map. It was more around who's implementing, and then based on our end of year levels of recognition, at what level are they are they implementing? And so with the SSFI, as we read into it, we really thought that's not at all what we want to report. What we really want to do is focus on the outcome data for our PBIS schools. And also, what does a PBIS school look like versus, you saw there were still some white states on the map. What do our PBIS states look like compared to those non-PBIS districts? And so we really wanted to focus on that. And I'm going to show you an example of a couple of pages here in just a second. And again, the lagging report, it was becoming a little cumbersome. We received our 16-17 report in the summer of 2019. And what we really want to do is make sure that we're using that data as quickly as we possibly can. Because again, I mentioned we just were moved into our curriculum and instruction, teaching and learning department at the Georgia Department of Education. And so we're really going to take a look at not only behavioral outcomes, school climate and culture outcomes, safety outcomes, but we really want to take a look at if everything that we're doing with Fidelity, we should see academic outcomes for PBIS schools too. And so we'll share a little bit of that data with you as well. So how we evaluate the effectiveness of our work. This is just a screenshot of our 2017-18 annual report. And we really wanted to align our annual report with some of the things that we were challenged about in the SSFI. And I'll show you a couple of slides. So Georgia has a student health survey that we administer every year. It's probably one of the most comprehensive student health surveys in the nation. There are 91 questions. It used to be 121. We got feedback from schools and districts that it was a little long for the students to take. And so we were able to combine and consolidate some questions without really sacrificing too much of the integrity and the data that we receive. But we ask questions like, are students in your school frequently recognized for good behavior? And you'll see this is a student response. I'm also going to show you a couple other responses just as examples. And you can see how we take a look at non-PBIS schools versus all of our PBIS schools, and then we break it down by our levels of implementation. So installing is the first level of recognition. For a first year implementing school, they are all at the installing level. So we have to really temper our data to take a look at, in 2017-18, how many of our schools were installing. And you can see at the bottom, well, we keep a scale of the number of schools that we're talking about. And then our end of year recognition rises to the schools that are implementing with the highest fidelity are our distinguished schools. And so what we really want to take a look at is from our non-PBIS schools to our distinguished schools, to those that aren't in year one, that have really embraced what we have trained and taught in the framework of PBIS. Is there a difference in the fidelity? Is there a difference in some of the responses when we take a look at non-PBIS schools with those with highest fidelity? You can see here it's over an 8% increase just on that one question. And again, we have a wide variety of questions in the survey around climate, around safety, mental health, drug use, substance abuse. And so it really gives us a clear picture of what do our PBIS schools look like. So those are just a couple of examples from the student survey. Next, I'll show you an example of our faculty and staff, our personnel responses. And so we examine this data as well. It kind of helps us align with some of our other fidelity instruments with our schools. So they can take a look at in their own schools, is how the personnel response here also aligned with the SAS? Is it aligned with some of the other fidelity instruments that we use in PBIS? You know, are we getting the same responses, or is there a disconnect there? And so we really want to take a look at what does the personnel of the school say about how well the school culture and climate is. And so you see about teachers frequently recognizing students for good behavior, and then about high standards for achievement. And I think it's interesting, you know, about a 5% increase there from non-PBIS schools to schools implementing PBIS with fidelity on the question around, are we recognizing students for good behavior? And then parent responses. This is really important, because in the Georgia Student Health Survey, it never mentions PBIS. It never mentions in the PBIS school. And so oftentimes parents are not taking this survey from the perspective of the that their school is implementing PBIS, that they're using the framework. And so it's a really good indication for us to kind of take a look at, you know, with that absence language in the survey, do parents recognize that there's a difference in non-PBIS, all PBIS, and then the levels of recognition? And you see here, just my student feels safe at school, again, about a 5% increase. And then we also take a look at transportation and students transit from to and from home, to and from school. And again, we see an increase for those schools that are implementing with fidelity. So our student health survey really gives us a lot of information around the climate and culture. And it really had, the SSFI really has kind of honed us in on not only that, but also some of the academics as well. Not sure why that went back and not sure why that went forward. So let me get to—
Sorry, Jason, that's me. I'm gonna not touch the mouse.
Heather, you're sabotaging me here. I thought you were my friend. So yeah, as you see, we also really had to rethink the way that we do our team meetings. When we gather together and we discuss, and our team meets every week on Monday morning, and we have an agenda. I'm going to show you the agenda. But one of the things after being introduced to the SSFI are our team meetings and our objectives all aligned to exactly what they should be aligned to? And are we, you know, constantly reviewing our progress? Are we constantly taking a look at our activities? Are we looking at some of our outcome data? And so you'll see that we really tried to align some of that information. The slide here is just the top half. This is right before we start entering our items into our agenda, but you'll see what we just philosophically wanted to do was align every one of our agendas to what our mission is, what our goals are, and what our objectives are. And we felt by keeping that in the forefront, and then as we list our agenda items, are those tied back to the work that we should be doing? We don't want to get off track of what we actually should be doing. And when I first came to the DOE, you know, one of the things that our team really talked about is, as many of you know, PBIS is getting pulled in a lot of different directions, and we need to stay true to what we do, and be the very best at it. And so as we talked as a team, one of the things that we had to remind ourselves is, this is the work that we've committed to. This is what our action plan says. This is what our strategic plan says, that's the work that we're going to accomplish in the state of Georgia. Let's stay true to that. And then just conducting our team meetings, you'll see we had a team that put together norms for our meetings. We wanted to make sure that in each one of the meetings that we have shared responsibilities. What we really tried to emulate is how we coach districts and schools to run meetings. When we really did a self-examination, we weren't doing that. We weren't running our meetings like we're coaching teams to do. And so it was kind of a gut check of, here we are coaching one way and practicing another. And when we took a look at the SSFI and we really started thinking about it, we really decided we got to reimagine our meetings. One, to align with what we're coaching and what we're teaching, but two, to align with some of the work that we're doing with the SSFI. So we use OneNote. You saw that. We do meet weekly. We assign roles to team members, and actually our team members can volunteer. That's just they all have access. They all can amend the agenda. They can all upload items to the agenda. And we try and share in those roles and responsibilities, because we want everybody to have the opportunity to lead the meeting. We have everybody want to have the opportunity to examine the data. We have, when we have follow-up, we assign who has that follow-up. And then we really try and align all those actions to our action plan. The third thing that we really needed to take a look at, and that we will do, is rethinking our strategic plan. Again, for the guidelines 7 and 10, we wanted to make sure that that strategic plan wasn't something that, although it's a multi-year plan, we don't want to wait multiple years in order to go back and address it. And so this really also helped us align our work. Our strategic plan is also right on our website. You're more than welcome to go and take a look at it. The other thing is I've also uploaded it into files. And so if you wanted just to pull it up in the files in our chat, you're perfectly welcome to do that as well. And we wanted to make sure that some of the things that Heather mentioned a few minutes ago, some of our key stakeholders, what's being done in our legislature. Heather mentioned and showed several pictures of how closely we're aligned with the legislature in the state of Georgia. And one of the key things around that is we have some positions that are our General Assembly funds for us. And so keeping them in the loop and keeping that dialogue open is really going to be important to our work. And so making sure that what we're doing as a state, not just as an educational agency, but as the state of Georgia, that our work supports, again, Heather mentioned visits with the governor. We want to make sure that what we're doing in the state of Georgia supports the work that the governor has for us as well. And so we make sure we do that in our strategic plan. And we just were obviously a lot of states, and you're probably in the same boat. I think, Heather, you said we have about 12 states here. You're probably getting some guidance from your state superintendent about reimagining what K-12 education looks like now in this virtual world. And so we just received that document from our state superintendent. And so our team's going to have to, kind of look into that, dig into that and see, is the future of Georgia, especially now that things have changed, is it still reflective in our strategic plan? And we're really going to have to closely examine that work. Has things changed so much that we need to re-examine our strategic plan? And if that's the case, then we have to get started on that work relatively soon. In our strategic plan, you'll see something that's unique, and Heather alluded to this as well, that's unique to our state. One, we have some braided funds that are going on. We have also in our General Assembly budget, we have some line items around regional educational service agency, school climate specialists. And so in each one of those color districts that you see is one FTE or 2 FTEs based on the size of the district. So we have 2 of those districts that have 2 FTE and one that has one, and everyone else has 1 FTE, and they're to support the work of school climate in the schools. When those positions were placed in from our General Assembly, the idea was around these school climate specialists are here to support PBIS implementation in their districts. And so we have quite a few of those. I think 2 of those RESA districts, 100% of the schools are implementing PBIS, and you saw that on the map. But one of the things that we're really proud about is that we have this layer of support from the National TA Center, then 2 to the TA specialists that I put in the chat, and then down to the school climate specialists at each one of the RESAs that you see, and then district coordinators in each district that is implementing PBIS, and then school coaches. And we have it written in that those are requirements of PBIS implementation in the state of Georgia. And our strategic plan really operates everything that we do on this model, from getting resources from the national level all the way down to the school level. We follow this plan, and we hold monthly meetings with our school climate specialists, and we hold monthly meetings with our district coordinators to get feedback, especially today, on what are resources that you need, what are schools needing as things are changing, what can we do to support you. And so this model has really served us well and is outlined in our strategic plan, and it's the way we operate, and it's really key. We get a quarterly report from each one of those RESA districts, and here's just an example of one. I think I've cut off the name of the RESA, but what we ask them to do is just to report back to us, and this goes to our Office of External Policy. Just report back to us on what's some of the activities, what are the goals of the RESA districts and the school climate specialists, because what we want to make sure is the work that they're doing aligned to our strategic plan? Is the work that they're doing aligned to what we're trying to accomplish with some of our outcome data in our annual evaluation? And so these reports are submitted to us on a quarterly basis. And again, these move up the chain to our Office of External Policy, because what we always want to do is to be able to go back to the legislature and the General Assembly and the people that have invested in PBIS in the state of Georgia and say, here's the proof that the work's being done. Here's the proof that it's making a difference and a change. So when we layer the strategic plan with these RESA quarterly reports, with our annual evaluations, what we want to make sure that we have are a wide variety of data at all levels to show that the work's being done. It's being done with fidelity. And so the RESA quarterly report, it really helps us with that and helps us align our strategic plan. And then I'm just going to close with a little bit around these guidelines 1, 2, and 5 around the process. Here's what I will tell you about the process is we're not perfect at it. As a matter of fact, as soon as we finished the process the first time, we immediately said in our after action report, here are things that we're going to do differently the next time that we do this. We really tried to follow the same process as what we coach for the TFI. Wanted to go through item by item and vote on each item, and then on those items that we didn't have consensus, we wanted to discuss those items and really work through the process of how can we make sure that because we talked about the team meetings, how can we make sure that what we're coaching on the TFI that we're following through on the SSFI? And that was really important to us. And again, it was not perfect, but I felt like it was a really great launching point for us. What I will tell you is rely on your TA specialist, get guidance from them. There were some items that we couldn't get consensus about, or that we had questions about implementation. I just pulled a couple of the ones that I had to go to Heather and say, Heather, we need some guidance on these two. We need some guidance on what it means to refine policy, because on the PBIS team, at the DOE. We're not in the policy making part of our organization. So what does that mean? And then around performance evaluations, we're not in the evaluation of annual performance for teachers and instructional staff and those kind of things. So let's help me with this so I can relay that back. And so we learned a key lesson, and that is communicate as you're going through the process with your TA specialist, and they're going to give you great guidance on what we can do, what we can't do. But most importantly, it was clarifying questions. As you know, you saw that we have a team of about 15. And so 15 of us are coming and we're reading each one of those items, and we're bringing our journey on PBIS to that question or to that item. And we all 15 of us have different journeys that we've been on and have different understandings and interpretations. And so it was really great to sit and discuss that and me hear from the rest of the team members how they interpret that. And then when we couldn't come to consensus, or we couldn't come to an agreement, or we just felt like we were at an impasse, then we take that to Heather at the National TA Center and say, okay, help us out. We're a little bit stuck here, and we want to make sure that we're doing this with fidelity, that we're understanding the process the best way that we can. And so she was really able to help us to kind of guide us through that, through the rest of that process. So if you have any questions or comments, you're happy to put those also in the chat. And also, please feel free to contact me. That's our email address. That's my work cell phone number. If you have anything that we can help with, we're more than happy to help. Again, what we're doing is not perfect, and what we're doing is going to be improved on as we continue to do this. But I felt like that we were, really off to a good start, and we're more than happy to help you in any way that we can. There's some of our social media that you can follow us on. And then Heather, I appreciate it. And I'm going to turn this back over to you so you can talk about session evaluation.
All right, thank you, Jason. Awesome stuff. So again, Jason, one of the questions I see that came in the chat box is the work done through the Early Learning Climate Aligned Initiative reflected in your use of the SSFI?
It is. And so if you have specific questions around the SSFI, we've got two TA specialists that are really committed to our early learning. And we make sure that that work is also aligned. And I see that that question also, Heather, from Mary. So we do align that work, and we do make sure that it's reflective. And so it's great for Shannon and Brandy to bring that perspective of early learning as we're going through the items of the SSFI, Mary, to make sure that we're staying on top of that. So we also make sure that it's aligned with our school climate transformation grant work. We'll also make sure that it's going to be aligned with our Project Aware grant work. But we definitely try and make sure that that's reflected. So that's a great question.
And then Karen, I wondered if you're able to just give a little bit of insight related to Power BI. I see that there's some questions that have come in from there.
Okay. Well, Power BI, if you're not familiar, is it's a software that's affiliated with a Microsoft product. We chose to use that for our data display and data management when we revised our evaluation system, because it would give us more access and more quick change. So we could modify if we wanted to look at the data differently, whereas in the past we would have static things that our programmer would program into the website. It would take a long time. Once we had an idea of what we wanted, he would have to program it. And so the time and resources it would take, but with Power BI, it doesn't take necessarily programmer time. It takes somebody who understands Power BI. So we can use our a data management person, and we can then manipulate the information. We have access through that, and then we can, as I said, embed those into our website as well. If there are a couple of kinds of business intelligence software out there, if you're familiar with things like Tableau, it's very similar in terms of how it functions. But that's how we ended up picking that. So.
Heather, Georgia also uses Power BI, and I encourage you, not only for our PBIS, but as we started getting into Power BI and using it for data display, our superintendent found out about it. And so we actually also use it on our DOE website to maintain school opening and closing, COVID rates. You can do a whole lot with Power BI. And so just to kind of take a look at some of the things that you can do, you know, if you want to also visit your website, but also the Georgia Department of Education, we use the same as well. And it's fantastic. So
one of the really nice things about Power BI is it can integrate data from different sources. And like when we started with Power BI about 3 years ago, it had about 40 or 50 different data sources that it could bring in and display. So, and that it was increasing based on demand. So, you know, if you use Qualtrics, it can take Qualtrics data and immediately bring it right in. You don't have to like build an interface and all of that. So it's a really great option.
Yeah.
Thank you. So as you guys can see, it's 3 o'clock, which I know this ends our session. And of course, my dogs are barking like crazy. So perfect timing for that. If you guys have a chance, if you could please fill out the evaluation, this information would be really helpful for us. When I saw the people who had written in the chat box saying where they were from, which thank you for doing that. I did see that there were some folks that were here that are coming from districts. And the part that I wanted you guys to know is even though we were focusing this session around state, obviously what states are doing, they're doing everything to best impact and support the district. So what you're learning from that, it could be that you're coming from a state that doesn't have a strong state project for if there's a lack of funding or whatever. And it could be like, hey, this could be, you know, data and evidence of helping you to say, we need this in our state as well. But I also want you to know that you're not alone, and everything that we had talked about, you can certainly do all of this at a smaller scale within just your district. That planning piece is absolutely important. Using that data, pulling that leadership team together, having a clear vision and reevaluating and examining how you're doing and adjusting along the way makes a big difference. Just know that you guys are not alone whatsoever. And if you have additional questions, you can go ahead, type them in the chat box. You can always contact us. We've got all of our contact information. We'd be happy to follow up. I also want to remind you too, you probably know who your PBIS state coordinator is. But in case you don't, you can always go to the national website at pbis.org and look under state coordinators, and it will have the contact information of who the representative is from the National Center as your PBIS partner for your particular state, as well as who your local contact person is. And if there's any delay in hearing from your local contact person, again, contact us and we'll help facilitate that process. But until then, good luck to you guys. Just know that you're not alone, and just know that no two states are exactly alike too. So we learn from each other, we borrow ideas from each other, and we all got to stick together and network with each other in this process. So have a great rest of the forum, and thank you for giving your time to us today. Bye-bye.